Is David the Atari 8-bit podcast.
That was my first attempt at any writing of any kind. I didn't necessarily really know a whole lot. It was just a lot of sort of stumbling around trying to figure out what to do.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Richard Leinecker is the author of the book Your Atari Comes Alive, which was published by Alpha Systems. The book provides instructions for building hardware projects that work with the Atari 8-bit computers, such as event detectors, motion sensors, a light pen, Christmas lights, and networking computers together. The book has been scanned and is available at the Internet Archive. He also wrote a follow-up book, Your Atari ST Comes Alive. He also wrote for Compute, A.N.A.L.O.G Computing, and ST-Log magazines. This interview took place November 8th, 2015.
Before the beginning, I want to know about how you got into computers, the first time you saw an Atari machine, and just kind of set the stage for me.
Yeah, so I actually have a degree, a master's degree in applied music. But as I was leaving graduate school, I asked about an Apple II computer, and the instructor said, "Oh, it's really complicated. You probably wouldn't understand it." So as soon as I had a job and some income, I bought a computer. And as it turns out, I think it was Toys R Us had Atari 800s for sale, and they were a reasonable price. And so I picked one up real quick and taught myself BASIC and then taught myself 6502 assembly. And it was just it just fit me. So I started really taking it seriously, and I started building projects to plug into the ports. And from there, it was just join the user group and just did a lot of stuff like that. Wrote articles. I've written for like A.N.A.L.O.G and later on ST-Log, and we had a like a journal for our local user group that I wrote for also. So that's kind of how it began. I'm not sure if that's enough detail, but that's what led up to it.
Nice. Yeah, I saw that you had a bunch of stuff in Compute magazine. I didn't notice that you had the stuff on A.N.A.L.O.G and ST-Log. That's awesome.
Yeah, actually, I was on the staff of Compute magazine for 3 years, so that's kind of how I got so much. I wrote for Compute every month for not only when I was on the staff there, but before and after. So it was just a really good experience where I got to learn the industry, the technology, and I got a lot better at writing too.
I bet. Nice. All right. So before we get to Compute and all that, you're teaching yourself to program. You're building those little hardware projects, and I assume most of which ended up in Your Atari Comes Alive.
Correct.
So, at what point did you decide I'm gonna write this book? How did that come about?
Well, I used to go to the bookstore and just kind of peruse the technology books, and every time I'd read a book, or look at a book on the shelves, I'd buy a lot of them and read them. Of course, back then there weren't that many, and I'd always say, I could have written this book, and it was always sort of along those lines that, there was nothing special about the book really, and I always said, I could have written this book myself, and so I just decided that at that point I would write and to some publishers to see what kind of feedback I got. And I did actually write to Compute books at the time, which I wasn't associated with. That was a number of years earlier, and they actually expressed some interest in what I pitched. I pitched, here's a title that teaches people how to create these little hardware gadgets, and so it was a combination of software and hardware. And at the time, people were doing that. Like I guess maybe it was Byte. I'm not sure. They had that one Kiershiz seller where they would every month they'd have a hardware project that you could build, and so anyway, I just thought, well, people would really like it. And nowadays nobody would do that, but back then people were building little hardware projects and stuff. So my dad was a ham and I was a ham, so I always sort of even though I had a background in music, I always gravitated towards electronics and electronic projects. So it just sort of fit me and my personality, and it fit everybody in the user group. And the user group I was in, every month I would be showing them some of the projects and as a demo, and they seemed to give me some really good feedback. So I think it's just sort of all sort of converged on the idea to produce the book.
Nice. So how'd you end up publishing with Alpha Systems? It's not exactly one of the major publishers back then.
No, they actually weren't very big at all, because they were, well, Compute actually did answer me, and they said that they would be interested, and please submit, what copy I had. Unfortunately, I had sort of somewhat misrepresented it, and I said, I was pretty far along and all that kind of stuff, just to try to get them to bite. Well, they said, okay, send your material, and at that time I didn't have any material to send, so the Compute connection was off. So they actually had one of their regular authors go ahead and do a book similar to it. I forget what the title is.
Yeah, there was a book one I'm thinking of called Electronic Computer Projects for Atari and Commodore.
Yeah, I think that was it. So they took my idea, and since I didn't respond to them, they had someone else write it. So then I wrote a bunch of other publishers, and Alpha Systems was the only publisher who responded to me. So, but at the time, the Atari market was really sort of maturing, and the ST was due to come. I'm not sure how many people knew exactly what was going on, but the ST probably came out another year or so after that, maybe 2 at the most. So, the Atari market, especially the Atari 800 market, had really somewhat matured, and I'm not sure the larger publishers wanted to, tackle it anymore, just because the numbers were. And I ran into the same thing with Microsoft Press a number of years later. I had written something on the early Visual Basic or Basic 4.5 with them, and since they were getting ready to start pushing Windows, they didn't want to touch something that was earlier technology. So I found over the years that the publishers really they want to always jump on the new bandwagon, and it must be because the numbers when they're doing the older technology just aren't there. And generally, even like, I've spoken at TechEd and the PDC, Microsoft PDC, and they never do anything like, for a year it'll be Com Plus, and then the next year it'll be, maybe web services, but they don't even touch the previous topics, just because, they've reached a saturation. Nobody wants to touch it. So nobody will go to the sessions anyway. So I think Alpha Systems had some pretty good products that they did pretty well. They were a small company, but they were still making money. So, but they didn't last much longer. I don't think I think it was only a year and a half after they published Your Atari Comes Alive that they were even around, because, the Atari magazines just kind of went away. Now, I guess ST-Log sort of lingered. Of course, that was totally dedicated to the ST, and Compute had an abysmal ST section that really just it was like 2 or 3 pages every month. So that's why I went with Alpha Systems.
Did you make any royalties off that, or?
No, they paid me they paid me an initial advance of $700, and now. I don't know if I would have made royalties, but they never even sent me a royalty statement. So I'm not sure if Alpha Systems, had gotten to the point where they just were so small and so sort of behind, and I mean they might have been losing money, or just, maybe, I don't really know what their internal situation was, but I never got a single royalty statement.
Wow, unfortunate.
Yeah.
So there were 2 versions of this book, as far as I can tell. Your Atari Comes Alive, and then Your Atari 8-Bit Comes Alive.
Okay, yeah. Now, I later self-published Your Atari 8-Bit Comes Alive, and I also self-published Your ST Comes Alive. So it was later. It was around the early 90s. It was late 80s that I did that, probably 88. I self-published both of those books and tried to sell them, and the market had certainly matured by that point, so nobody was going to buy anything about an 8-bit book, and I wasn't smart enough to realize that. I just thought, I like the Atari 800. A lot of other people will too, but I didn't understand marketing or business plans or anything like that. And the ST just never delivered on its promise. Atari just told, of course, I don't know, this is an Atari podcast, maybe I shouldn't say this, but Atari just never, the ST never realized its potential, which it really could have.
Yeah.
It was a fantastic machine at a reasonable price, and the Amiga on the other side was a fantastic machine at a reasonable price too. So neither company was able to fight against go against the tide for the IBM clones.
I found, and as long as we're talking about various iterations of the book, I found a 2013 reprint of Your Atari 8-Bit Comes Alive.
Wow, really? No, I have nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I thought you might not, because it was like from some Japanese or Chinese company, and I don't know, it seems like it seemed iffy about whether it was legitimate or not. But they claim to have 20 copies. They might have just photocopied it for all I know. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, I tell you, if you can send me the link to that would be great. I'd buy a copy just for my archives. I've written quite a few books since then, and for major companies. So I've got quite a few larger titles. I've written for Compute, of course, since I was there, and I wrote for Addison Wesley and Q and Wiley and the old IDG press. So I've written quite a few books since then, so I like to keep my archives current. So if you could send me a link to that.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it here. I'll send it to you. And yeah, tell me if you order it. Tell me if it comes, and I'll order myself a copy too.
Okay. There was one book that really I felt sorry for whoever this guy was. He wrote a great book, but it was so late in the Atari 800 cycle. It was a book called Dr. Wacko's something or another, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever heard of that?
David Heller. I interviewed him. Yeah, he's a nice guy.
It was a fantastic book. I'm sure he didn't do very well, but I mean, I love that book. It was really, really good. So I don't know if he's done anything since. He probably got burned on that. I mean, it's really a lot of effort to write a book of any kind, even something, fairly small. Anything like that is a huge, huge undertaking. I used to write these 1,000-page books for Addison Wesley and IDG, and it would take me 9 months. And I'd get up at 4 a.m. and then go to work. I mean, I'd get up at 4 and write, and then go to work. So, writing is just a very, very I don't think people realize just how much, just absolute sheer work it takes. So anyway, I felt sorry for that guy that that was a great book. And, had it come out 3 or 4 years earlier, it would have definitely become a classic. So,
yeah, it's a fun book for sure. Well, compared to your 900-page books for Q and Addison Wesley, the 118-page Atari Comes Alive must have been super easy.
Yeah, it was pretty easy. However, I didn't know what I was doing. That was my first attempt at any writing of any kind. So I didn't necessarily really know a whole lot. So anyway, it was just a lot of sort of stumbling around trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was another guy. I'm sure you interviewed this guy for the Day Ray Atari. His name was
Crawford.
Chris Crawford. Mm-hmm. I saw him at a game developers conference speak, and he's a really good guy. I don't know if you know what he's up to right now.
I interviewed him a year and a half ago, and he gave me an update then, but I haven't followed him since then. He's still thinking about programming. He's still thinking about games and making better games, and that's totally where his head is at. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You might want to listen to that interview. He's super interesting.
Yeah.
And brilliant. Just a super smart guy. So tell me how you got writing for Compute. You said you were on staff at Compute.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was some nepotism here. My sister-in-law actually worked there, and by the time I applied, she worked at Compute Books, which is one of their divisions. So, she kind of opened the door there. So I kind of had an inside track, And then a guy I had worked with previous years named Martin Davies. He had been with, I think, Rainbird Software. The guy who wrote, it was one of the first 3D rendered games, and then he went to Origin Software. He was their director of sales at Origin. So he was he had a lot of credence at Compute. And he also gave me some pretty strong recommendations. So I took the job at Compute, and I moved up to Greensboro, North Carolina, and I stayed there for 3 years, and then I moved back to Miami for a year, and I was working at a company, we just did entertainment software. So, but after that, I came back to North Carolina. I forget what I did there. I've always been, I got a job at MCI, I think. So anyway, it's been a long career of technology companies.
One after the other. And they'll start with Atari.
Yeah.
With TR-80, I guess.
Correct. It all did start with Atari. And I guess the thing about Atari is it was really exciting. There were a lot of people who used and programmed Ataris. It was back almost in the Wild Wild West days when, you could take 2 or 3 months and come up with a real product. And even in the early days, you could put it in a baggie and sell it for $40 on the shelves. You didn't need any fancy packaging or whatever. I mean, that's how Richard Garriott with Ultima did it. That's how he did it. He just started off with Ultima. He did like all the way up through Ultima 6 and 7, which were pretty sophisticated. But in the early days, it was just a single floppy in a plastic bag.
Yeah, absolutely. People were just so hungry for the information they didn't care about the packaging.
Correct.
Let's see. All right, so you did in the Atari, in the 8-bit realm, you just did this one book. Well, you got renamed, but you did the one book, right? And then you did an
Correct.
ST version.
Yeah.
Is it? I haven't seen that version because I'm an 8-bit guy. But is that more of the same, more hardware projects that you?
Yeah, pretty much. It was the same. It was the same sort of projects. However, you had to interface to the ST in a different way. And in the 8-bit Atari 800, you could use the joystick port for almost everything. In fact, I even made a light pen. It was fast enough that you could even have a light pen. For the ST, you didn't have that anymore, so you had to do this thing through the expansion port. You had that's the only way, pretty much, to interface. So it was they were kind of the same projects, but with a different interfacing mechanism, and obviously all the software was different.
But haven't I asked you about 8-bit stuff that I should have? Tell me a story.
I mean, that's really about it. Those days are so dark and hazy as far as even my remembrance. I live in a PC. Actually, I really live in an academic world now. I teach software engineering and at University of Central Florida. So, I mean, I'm so abstracted from stuff like the Atari 8. I really forget a lot of it. So
yeah.
So anyway, but I guess as to your point that you made about 5 minutes ago, it all started with me learning how to program in BASIC on the Atari 800. And I went on, and from a music degree, I now have a PhD in computer science. So it really did get me started.
Nice.
And it wasn't just the computer; it was the community around the computer that was just. I mean, people would just get really excited about the newest software and the newest way to program that they would discover, and it was just a really conducive atmosphere to programming.
So, looking at the book, you've got projects in here for light pens and tone decoders and encoders and stuff, and how to interface with the joystick ports. And I'm wondering I know it's a long time ago, but can you remember any projects that didn't make it into the book, or something that you tried that was just too weird or too didn't work, or was just not of general interest, or I don't know. What else? I guess I'm asking what else you hooked up to your Atari that we don't know about.
Okay, so the one really cool thing I did, and I demoed it for the user group, was I actually networked four 800s together, and I mean, you got to figure they were networked through the joystick port, and I had like a hub in the middle, and I mean, this was primitive, but that would have just been about as big as the entire book in order to include that. So that never made it, just because of the scope of that project. And I mean, I had to write an assembly language handler and all that kind of stuff. So it was that never made it, but that would have been really cool. I did demo it, but it just wasn't ready to be included.
Yeah, I've heard various stories about people mostly running BBSs that did things like that to network several machines together.
Yeah. And it was easy with the ST because, you had the MIDI port, and you could go ahead and talk through the MIDI port. But the 800 was a totally different situation.
If you could send a message to the people who read your book and articles back in the day, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would actually ask them to send me if they did any projects, or they liked anything or didn't like anything. I'd just love some feedback. And you can find my contact page at rickleinecker.com. And it would just be a thrill for me to hear from anybody who read and used the book.
Nice. Did you hear from people back in the day? Did you ever get feedback on the book or anything?
No, I never did. I don't think there was any contact information. I mean, back then I didn't even have an email address. I'm not even sure I was running the BBS at the time. But when I did the ST version, I did get feedback from people. So and that was always thrilling when people would contact me and talk about what they'd been doing.
So you said you didn't get any royalty statements, but do you have any sense of how many copies of this book were available?
I don't. They advertised it in A.N.A.L.O.G, and what was the other one that?
Antic.
Antic, that was it. They advertised it in A.N.A.L.O.G and Antic, and I just don't know. I suspect that they probably didn't sell that many, just because it was just in the latter days of those two magazines, and the readership was really dropping off. And also, even if I hadn't gotten any royalties, they would have sent me a statement anyway, because all of my other publishers send me a statement. And if they owe me zero, they say we owe you zero, but they at least tell me what the sales were. So I suspect that Alpha Systems was they were probably struggling just to kind of keep things going.
So you said you ran a BBS?
Yeah, I started to run a BBS, but I ran it off of no, I actually did start off in an 800. I ran an 800 BBS for about a year and a half, and then I switched over to an ST BBS. So I was in Miami, Florida, and we had a group of BBSs down there that were, and all the sysops knew each other. So it was a really fun community down there, because people who had Ataris were hungry, and they were always there. It was the war between Atari and Apple and PCs, which was actually pretty small at the time, and the Amigas, or the Commodore. We call them Commodores. but so the Atari community was really kind of tight knit. So yeah, so I ran a BBS, one on an 800 for a while, and then on an ST. And then at a certain point, the internet became what you did. So there's no sense in running a BBS.
What was the BBS called?
Infinite Vision Technologies.
It's an awfully big name for a computer, for a BBS running off an Atari 8-bit.
Yeah.
Infinite Vision. Nice. Who was David Byrd? He says, this book says by you and David Byrd.
Yeah, so he was a guy who was in the user group with me, and he also ran a BBS. So we knew each other from that. So he helped me more with the software. He didn't know any of the hardware, so he did a bit of the software development. He happens to be dead now, though, so it'd be tough to interview him.
Yeah,
I shouldn't be laughing about someone who's dead, but I'm not even sure. I really lost track of him completely, and then I just happened upon his obit. So I think that's been 10 years ago. So I guess that's what happens when you're talking about Ataris. People who use Ataris start to age out.
It happens. Yeah, it's kind of why I'm doing this now, because we're already losing people. So,
Yeah.
well, on that happy note, is there anything else I should ask you that we should talk about?
No, not at all. I think that's it. If anybody's interested in finding out what I've done since that endeavor, just rickleinecker.com, and you can leave me a message on my contact form, and I'd love to hear from anybody, really.
Great. I will put a link to that in the show notes, and so people will be able to find you without even spelling your last name. So.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you later.
If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.